All right, my name is Michael Tidwell. I'll be moderating this panel. We'll keep intros short so we can get to the good stuff. So in one word or less, do you want to do a quick intro?
I'm Rabble. I work on Nostr.social and causes.com.
Ben, I work on some Nostr stuff. And then, yeah, that's it really. Been around for a while.
Hey, I'm Will. I made the Damus client and Zaps.
And I would just describe myself as a Nostr user hobbyist, using the dev kits and stuff. So I proposed this panel and it got accepted. One of the things I've always been thinking about as soon as I learned about Nostr was how is this thing going to scale? How can we actually use it? And I want to get into more of the infrastructure stuff about it. Everyone here has run a relay. My experience was through my company, ZBD. But I want to get into, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions on what a relay actually is and what it's doing. The first thing I want to do as part of this panel is, as a group, we discuss what is the design space currently of a relay.
Yeah, so for us, our initial relay efforts were actually not user-accessible relays. We actually run a whole network of bots that crawl the Nostr network and make sure that we make accessible to the NOS app anybody who is replying to you and following up on you. And we haven't switched to the outbox model because of that. And the initial development was so that username lookups and contact lookups and relay lookups would be fast. And then only after that do we actually turn on a relay that the app by default publishes to. But it goes to the Damus relay and a bunch of others too by default.
It's because so many problems can be solved by making the server smarter. So I'm quite keen on keeping relays as just relays and not doing too many complex operations.
Is there like a minimum design space that a relay must do in order to be a relay, though?
Yeah, it's simply just relaying data, isn't it, I guess? But then that goes down into the feasibility of running a relay as well, like how much stuff you're going to store on there and whatever else. But yeah, so I'm keen on keeping relays dumb.
Yeah, I think that's a really important property of relays, is just to implement NIP01 and try not to get too fancy, because it is very valuable that you can tap into a large collection of relays and it should all just work the same. So, if we're exploring on expanding the capabilities of relays, I'd be very cautious of doing that, because it's a very powerful thing to just have that consistent interface across these, ubiquitous interfaces across all these different servers, and that provides a lot of power so you can build on top of that.
So we're kind of, it seems like there's consensus here of saying, let's keep relays pretty dumb, pretty simple, minimum kind of spec here. But these relays, some publicly accessible, some not, storing data for various lengths of time. What is, when I think of a relay, what am I really grabbing at here?
Yeah, it gets really interesting, because technically right now Damus has a relay inside of the application. And we extend, we add additional functionality. We have full text search within Damus. We have, we're going to eventually have some more advanced features that you can interface with in the client side, such as aggregation filters, doing more advanced queries. And it might be tempting to implement a lot of those things on relays that everyone can use, like publicly accessible relays. But again, based on what we said, it's kind of, you lose a lot of the power of having the ubiquitous interface. Yeah, so I see it as a large variety of different, different cache levels in some sense, because you're going to have those long-term relays that store everything, and maybe they're not as fast. But then there's these really fast relays that might not store everything. Stir fry is a good example of this. It's an extremely fast relay. It's so fast, it's almost like a static cache. That's how fast it is. And then you're going to have the relays in the client. So there's a wide variety of different ways to interact with relays, but and at different levels of the cache. So I think we're just starting to explore that, though, in terms of what that means.
One of the things we discovered in recent work with relays is we had not realized that stir fry doesn't do the full text search, doesn't do the hashtag search. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, and they're just hey, my client isn't working. And so we expose in the apps which NIPs the relay is supporting, but we don't give in any of the apps a really great interface for exploring that and understanding that, and be like, so now we have all these kind of annoying like help text things, which is like, don't add too many relays, don't do too few relays, make sure you have a relay that supports search, and like the users don't like. That's not great.
I think quite often as well, like in a client, it comes packaged with a certain set of relays. And then more often than not, that could probably be replaced by a multiplexer where it's just one relay, which is sorting data. And then you get all the features from all the different relays. And then if you want to, you can go in and open it out and do some more granular relay selection and add different relays. But for me, like, I suppose the question really comes around to the incentives on running relays. And we have people running relays altruistically. We have some people experimenting with paid services. There's some idea for OpenSats to support some relays altruistically. But I think ultimately there should be some business models around running relays and paid services. So I like the ephemeral nature of notes on Nostr that eventually they'll just disappear. But then I also like in Twitter, when I would post something, sometimes I would do it just to timestamp an idea. So I would like clients to, if there's a particular post you want to be persistent, I could pay some sats and then someone's going to store it for me. So yeah.
I'm just gonna, I'll just continue a little bit on that. I think it's probably mostly my fault that, I made relay such a first-class thing within the interface in DOMIS, and people think about it and like, oh, what relay should I use? And I'm gonna pick this relay over this one. But in reality, it's probably something users should never have to think about. Especially in the outbox model, things should just work and you shouldn't have to think about it. And I don't know, I think we're moving toward there. So I think a lot of the discussions about like which relays to choose and all these things and all these decisions, these shouldn't be decisions that users have to make.
Okay, so I'm still, based on everything that we said, I'm still a little vague on what a relay should do, right? I mean, I know what it can do, but there's a couple different directions we can take this. I like where you're taking it, Ben, where we're talking about incentives, and maybe that's a good natural kind of way to take this discussion, where it's like incentive relays and stuff, and you're talking about business models around relays. The first question I want to ask is, through your experience of running infrastructure, what have you seen in terms of costs? Has anything been unexpected in terms of, dollars being spent, or I guess euros or whatever you want to call it, being spent per amount of users actually interacting? Anyone want to share any stats?
So, I mean, it's remarkably cheap for what it is. And I had a discussion with some of the folks working on Blue Sky, and their infrastructure, like the actual events in Blue Sky and sort of the overall architecture is very, very similar, except they put the computation in very different places. So they have relays, and they have a few things that cost them a lot of money to run. A lot of money to run those indexes, and the construction of what you want to request has to happen on this app server. It was so expensive they had to move off vServers and into bare metal machines. And we're not seeing that in the Nostr world at all. Like, we have a much lighter weight way of doing queries on stuff. And so the relays, like, there was a lot of worry about the cost of relays, and it hasn't been a problem.
Yeah, it's really funny because I hear this all the time, and even just this panel, I'm like, are we still talking about the sustainability of relays? Because running a relay is actually really cheap. It's definitely not the most expensive thing at DOMIS. Like, I think the DOMIS relay is probably one of the biggest relays, and it's expensive. Not gonna lie, it's like a couple $100 a month. But that's not
very expensive.
It's not that expensive compared to paying employees and the other things. So it's strange to me that we're talking about the sustainability of relays. I think it's always done in the context of this idea that there's going to be like these mega relays and they're going to be really expensive, and if we don't have these mega relays, then the whole network's not going to work. But honestly, just now that we're like moving more to an outbox model, you can just run it on your computer at home, or you can run it on a cheap VPS for like $20 a month, and it doesn't need to serve lots of load, because the client is going to intelligently pick the right relay for that one person, and it's not going to be that a big deal. So I think that the costs are going to be distributed across lots of low cost nodes and commodity servers, and I think that's kind of the vision that I'm starting to see for Nostr relays.
I think there's time, though, when you run a relay, you need to update the relay, you need to do stuff to it, and then as well as that, there's scale. So we're talking 100,000 users, and then maybe it's a couple $100 a month. But then when we have a billion users, then how much is it going to be a month? And then it's like, how do you justify that cost? And there are going to be, and it makes sense as well that there's some big relays. The point of Nostr is the resilience. So if one of those relays acts in a way which you don't like, you've got freedom of movement, you can just move to a different relay. But I do think there will be big relays, and they will be costly to run, and they will require teams of people to kind of keep an eye on and update, and that will require some sort of business models. But I think there's a bunch of stuff out there. Relays are like one of the untapped. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of work to be done just on making profitable services which you can run on relays. Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, and if we start getting lots and lots of users, like let's say Damus itself starts getting lots of users, starts getting lots of subscribers, then that will just it'll keep funding, you know, our relay, so we can improve it, make it more scalable. Like, no one's really doing, you know, horizontally scaled Nostr relays right now. It's usually just throw stir-fry on it, and stir-fry is so good.
Relayable runs a network where they're running stir-fry relays that are actually used. Stir-fry has a peering extension that's not part of Nostr, but lets you sync. It creates Merkle trees, and it lets you sync between relays, so you can run a CDN of your relays. And I think that's how we scale. Is we can scale horizontally and start putting them closer to users, and that seems pretty easy.
So,
It's just all solved problems. Like, this has been done. You know, engineers have been doing this across. You know, I mean, typically centralized services. There's this one. I think Semisol's working on a database, a Nostr relay based off of Foundation DB, which is like Apple's distributed database. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, you know, sharded across many servers. So yeah, people are working on it, and we're going to have these massive relays that work really well. And that'll probably be a bit more expensive, but I don't know. We'll see when we get there.
Okay, you brought up the idea that, you know, these relays are sharing data. That's one way of scaling. That was not part of the initial design of, you know, Nostr and its relays.
No, it's not even a NIP yet.
Okay, so what I'm trying to get at is, you know, we're talking about potentially, you know, the scaling through, you know, going to like this like share relay kind of model. Is that, I kind of have like two questions for you. One, I think that would help produce this idea of a worldview, which I think a lot of new people that come into Nostr kind of just assume exists. So my first question is it important for Nostr to have a worldview? And then if not, why? And if so, why? And I'm curious to get your take on that, because, you know, I've talked to a lot of people who think it's important. I even asked this question to a Nostr panel at a Bitcoin conference in Texas a few months back, and everyone on the panel agreed a worldview is important. I'm curious to get y'all's take on it.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing a bunch of experiments trying to figure out where relays should fit in the thing, and we have added in a menu that lets you just view all the content from a relay, and then we removed that menu, and then we added the menu back, and then we removed it, and then we added it back again, as we tried to figure out what role it is. And leading up to the Olympics, we actually did a partnership with a paid relay, where if they were using Nostr Social, they were auto-opted in. If they weren't, they could pay 1,000 sats, and they got exclusive content, and it was a permissioned relay. And we discovered that not a lot of Nostr clients are using NIP42 authentication on reads. Almost all of them that do it on writes. And so we had to do some figuring out on there. We also tried to use LN bits and ran into bugs. Yeah.
What were the bugs?
We were so excited. I don't know. We'll have to talk about it. But so we didn't get the auto payment. So now we just had a thing where we looked for things coming into the wallet and added people. Fiat Joff runs this thing called Countries, which is a relay that only gives you back content from people who are connecting from the same country. And I think that's also super interesting. It's like, are relays an object that users know about or not? And I think it's a not solved question.
So, I mean, when I talked to Fiat Joff about this, he's very clear to me that Nostr's design was never really the worldview kind of idea. It was more communities. So that's why I think there's this sort of idea where I believe people want this sort of, you know, relay communication, scalable kind of like, you know, I don't want to use the word mastodon, but like, you know, the idea that, you know, these hub and spokes actually, you know, communicate. And, you know, same question for Ben.
Yeah,
is that important? And if so, why? If not, why?
I agree. I think it makes sense. Like, it's one of the tool set for offering people a good experience. And then if a client say if you make a themed client for something, so I really like the idea of themed clients, because I said it in my talk about the internet having forums originally, like people wanted to gravitate towards its shared interest. But if you have a themed client, that client could come packaged with a particular relay which they operate and run. And then that could have, the majority of its users are automatically using that relay, and they kind of opt out of that relay. So I like the idea of communities focused around relays, but it's just trial and error. Like the tool set we have will scale very well, but it could scale in a whole bunch of different directions. It's not so much an issue. It's more like, what's the best way of doing it, or what's the most beneficial way of doing it for users. But I do like the idea of different relays servicing different communities of people. And then that being part of the way they get access to data which they find relevant to them.
But just to be clear, is it important to have that sort of shared view?
Yeah, I mean, it does. To me, it doesn't really matter.
Or I guess how important. This is very opinionated.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. Like, in your opinion, is it important?
Yeah, totally. So, like, people who currently, I mean, obviously, you can do filtering, whatever else, but people who currently use Nostr for the first time who are not Bitcoiners are very quickly turned off by the fact there's a whole bunch of Bitcoiners on there. So being able to pick hobbies and interests they're interested in or whatever, and then being able to see content relevant to them, and then follow people who share the same, like this typical experience when you connect to a Twitter or something, and then you select, I don't know, I can't remember when I did it, but I think you select like hobbies or interests or stuff you're interested in, and then it feeds you relevant data. That could also be done on a relay basis, just that there's certain relay servicing a certain community. Like the activists in the Human Rights Foundation, when we were onboarding them, like you tell them the Nostr proposal, and they're like, oh, that's perfect. This makes perfect sense. And then they open it up, and it's a load of Bitcoiners, and they go, I don't know if we could work with this. And that's important that we get around that, like it's, and that we give people an onboarding experience where they get access to relevant information, and obviously through custom algorithms and the feeder marketplace.
So what's the question? Like worldview? What do you mean? Like like one consistent view of
right? Because the reason I'm asking this is because when I talked to Fiat Jeff about it, he's like, why would you ever think this is important? Kind of idea. And everyone I talk to thinks it actually would be a nice thing. It would be important. It would be something they're interested in. I'm curious. This is the second panel I've sort of asked this question
again.
to.
But like, what do you mean by worldview though? Do you mean like?
Well, so that's a great question, because what is a worldview when it comes to a decentralized relay system, right? So it's it's almost purposely vague, and you're right to ask that counter question.
Because I mean, in some sense, Damus was set up to do that model, because the relay pool model, which people give me hell about all the time, was really just like, okay, because I read Nib01, and it was like, okay, it's basically Twitter, but we add a few more servers, and it's a little bit more decentralized, and like that's good enough if you want to rebuild that worldview model of just like one global relay that everyone connects to with a few backups and a few so that you can't be censored. I wasn't really thinking about thousands of relays. I kind of thought that was like a silly idea back in the day. But now that people are starting to flesh out that model a bit more, it's starting to make more sense that that's probably the only thing that's going to really scale until we have like better relay software. And I don't even think it makes sense. Like I think it actually makes way more human sense that there isn't a single global view of the world. It's like getting news from the TV, and like the TV is telling you this is the one perspective. It's such a centralized and it's just not reality. Humanity is inherently decentralized and communal, and why not just structure our software in the same way instead of trying to force this one global view on things, which just seems very unnatural.
Well, I see it a little bit differently. It's more just like, let's say I'm interested in what Ben's saying, and I don't want to have to read from every single relay. And I just kind of know that these relays are going to sort of cross-ag everything that Ben said, so I know sort of like how to get that worldview of what I want to look at. I think that's more or less kind of what I'm talking about. So you can find the data that you are actually interested in finding without having to guess which relays they're on. Is that
that's like just the outbox model, though.
Well, it's again, these are things that are like, sort of like assumed, but not, what I mean?
Yeah,
out of the box.
No, I mean, I think that's going to be the way to do it. Obviously, is just you outbox and you ask. There's going to be, you store your notes in your particular relay, and then you have to have that. There's this one centralized point which is fetching down the relay lists it could be just you get it from, that's kind of like a game theory issue. It's like maybe it's the, that one point where everyone goes to get the relay list. But once everyone has that, then you know where to get all the nodes for each individual user. And then
Yeah, one of the things we do, copying Pablo, is we run a bot that finds the relay lists and just reposts that to our relay, because we wanted the users to be able to find user profiles, contact lists, and relay lists easily. And so, like, one solution would be to have some sort of DHT or some sort of discovery mechanism, or people actually updating their relays on their NIP05, which people don't tend to do. But it wasn't that hard to just write a bot that crawled the network and republished those particular events.
Yeah, I mean, Google crawls the internet. Like, they seem to do it just fine. So I don't see why we can't just crawl some relays if we need to every now and then.
But they pay a little bit more than a couple $100 a month, right?
I just don't think it matters as well. Like, 'cause ideally, yeah, we have a horizontal scaling solution. But say if Elon Musk implemented Nostr and he has a big fat Twitter relay and everything's going through that, the very point of Nostr is that we can just, a user, if they're not happy with the way he's filtering content, or there's something shady happening behind that relay, then they can just connect to a different relay and then use the same client, and people can also leave with them and then connect to other relays. So you end up with just this free market of relays.
Do you have any kind of concern about maybe like your example of a really, really big player maybe doing it with a really good UX, sort of building up all this momentum, and then maybe slightly over time doing something that sort of is not in the spirit, and then it's like, oh, but they're so big and they're spending, they have such a good UX and they're so, they're spending all this
money. But that
will
incentivize someone else to spin up a competing relay. So you end up with this. This is what a commons does. So that the Nostr as a commons, if you act in an inappropriate way, then you'll get that invisible hand bitch slap. Just like we get in Bitcoin, if you try and co-opt the commons, if you try and do something which is inappropriate, eventually you end up with the invisible hand bitch slap. And that's the same in Nostr. Like, it's a resilient, self-healing network, and people will just migrate to some other relay. They're not captured. You've got freedom of movement, which is an important part of freedom of speech.
Yeah, and I don't even think they'll even need to do that. And so I'm trying to rebrand Outbox to just autopilot, because that's probably more accurate what it's actually doing. Although I think Lightning people are triggered when I say autopilot, because autopilot means something completely different, and it's way more annoying.
That's how you lose your money on Lightning.
I don't trust AI.
Just kidding.
With managing my Lightning channels. Like, I don't know. So autopilot and Lightning is kind of a little bit more sketchy, but autopilot and Nostr makes a lot of sense.
Can you shield this properly for people who don't know about Outbox and this rebrand autopilot, just so?
Yeah, it's removing the need to even think about, like, this guy's censoring me, so I need to go switch to use this other relay. It's just, it won't matter, because the clients are going to be so good at choosing the right relay for any given situation that it really won't matter, like, that one person censoring you, because you can just tell every other client via your relay list that, hey, get my nodes from here. Like, don't even worry about that this mega relay is censoring you. It's just get it from my node, and it's going to be fine. And then you can always turn it off, right? You can always switch to, like, non-autopilot and have a manual, like what you do in Damus right now, and then you can have more classic experience, like where you just, that model is really good for if you want to run a private relay for your company or for your friend group, and you definitely don't want random relays sending notes to you, or you getting notes from random relays. But I think as a default mode, autopilot just makes the most sense.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't have autopilot, then you end up making the same request to a whole bunch of different relays at the same time, and then you have to process those events. And especially on mobile devices, that can be a little bit intensive and lock up the UI. And so you don't want to be doing that. You want to be just making the request in a more optimized way.
Yeah, and if you do have the issue on mobile, I recommend trying out NostrDB, because then it will solve all those problems. But that's just me shilling my library for this moment.
I have Rabble, you brought up an idea of, like, or maybe it was Ben, I forget. Hey, your costs are this right now, but that's with this X users. If you get double X, your costs go up, 2X as well. Are your costs linear with your user growth kind of ideas? And at ZBD, we're running stir fry, and we're trying to run things at scale. I think, at least at one point in time, we had the most, kind of activity in our stir fry relay with all of our ZBD users, because, events were being posted, and, we onboard, hundreds of thousands of people, like, right there, right in the app, like, immediately. At one point, that's how we had the app really focused on social. And what we found is, even with stir fry, I mean, I know we're talking a good game about stir fry. It does not scale so easily when you start getting, real load on it, and it's very hard to manage, and it crashes, and you have to upgrade it, and it's down when you upgrade it. These things are not, this is, I've had so much pain running the infrastructure for Nostr that you guys talk about it like it's fucking easy. And I'm like, what the fuck are y'all talking about? This stuff is hard for me. Am I doing it wrong? Am I just have to have more users?
We act like Twitter is easy now, but for the first few years, there was a fail whale all the time. Like that initial figuring out how to scale Twitter was a really hard problem. And eventually got fixed. And we're going to have to figure out how to scale the relays and figure out how to optimize them. That on the other side, the crawlers, I looked it up. I think we spend $80 a month crawling the entire Nostr network for what we're looking for. And we're looking for specific posts or specific people to make notifications work. And it's just not that much. But, the trick is being able to scale horizontally. Scaling one big giant stir-fry relay, that's hard. You make a network of them, and then it's easier.
Do you think additional caching layers, I think Primal, or I don't know if they are doing something unique, but I think they have some sort of nice memory caching that they're doing. Do you kind of foresee any other kind of sort of like people who want to take this serious and really scale a bunch of users for a relay having to have this sort of custom sort of sauce, or do you think they're going to be able to use like the traditional sort of like the open source software itself will just become like super nice?
I don't think people understand how absolutely batshit insane stir fry is in terms of like a piece of software. The guy who wrote that, and like because I spent a good like month trying to study how it works. It is the most impressive piece of software I've ever seen, and it informed the design of the database that's in Damus today. But I think it's pretty much near optimal in terms of a single machine processing Nostr queries. So it's just going to be a matter of just like putting them all in parallel and just do any cast and just serve it from a bunch of stir fry relays. It really is that fast. I'd be very, very skeptical if you could make a relay faster than stir fry.
Well, I mean, okay. Last time I checked, stir fry runs real nice when you run individual, V nodes or VPSs for them and stuff. I mean, setting something up like with a real nice Helm chart is going to supersede that, right? So if you get something going where you can just horizontally scale on Kubernetes or something real ECS sort of ideas, then you're going to be able to get the same sort of parallelization, right?
Yeah,
with stir fry, it's more tricky to do that, right?
Well, I mean,
I was kind of provision your stuff ahead of time, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. One thing you could just do is, when a note comes into one of the relays, you just have it replicated across all those relays, and then which is really easy to do on stir fry, which you mentioned, and then you just do any cast and just like have like 100 stir fry relays that all have the same data, just serving. So I think like that would basically handle any level of task, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we're really lucky to have stir fry. One of the other relay experiments we did is at the last conference I was at, we set up a relay that was only accessible locally on the network. And then we told a bunch of people about it. And it was a really neat way to see everybody else there. But, and I would love us to be able to do more experiments like that. More things of like, we don't know the intersection of groups and relays and communities and content, but we can experiment on that. And because there's a plugin interface and you can write code there, there's a lot of neat things you can do. And so, and I think that the paid relays are super interesting. I'm super interested in the paid content. The question is, what is the interface that goes back to the user that tells them, one, how to discover it, what it is, what the payment is requested, whether or not they're a member, how they we're lacking sort of a layer on top of that to make it work better. But when we have that, then all this paid content stuff will work better too.
All right, we got just a few seconds left. Any last things you want to say? I'll just kind of open it up. Anything about future efficiencies, future things you're excited about? I'll just open it up.
I just want to say, and I don't know if many people know this, that the only reason why Nostr works today is because of stir fry. Because the Damus relay,
absolutely,
if the Damus relay ran the SQLite one, it ran the Postgres one, and they all eventually hit 100% CPU on all the cores. And at one point, people might not remember this, but Nostr just didn't work. Like the threads didn't load. And there was no really good solution to it until Stirfry came along. So like honestly, I can't sing praises more for Stirfry and Doug Hoyt, that guy who works on it. And so I love you, Doug.
It's just progress and just people working on these different solutions, and these aren't problems which are unsurmountable. It's just the way in which we decide to try and tackle
anything
problems.
you're excited about for the future for efficiency and scale.
I think it's the incentives of running relays and people making actual, companies or providing a service which they can provide for free for some people and then have some charge services. And it could be performing a whole bunch of different functions, and so some of them, it could be a relay which does KYC, so you can then reference that relay when you want to use a service which requires KYC. There's a great bunch of paid services which exist out there in the world now, which could be fulfilled by certain types of relays, and then maybe they could then use some of those funds to offer altruistic relays. But I think like the lads are saying here, like there's some very good solutions for scaling more horizontally. But then I also do think that it's definitely an area in which entire companies could be built around providing relay services.
If I run a huge relay and I start making my users the product, will you be upset with me?
I mean, because the client will just filter stuff out. So this is the thing about ads. I was thinking, because no matter what you do, you could DM them an ad and say, well, if you don't reply to this DM, then we're going to boot you off the relay. And that's maybe how. But I was thinking about the ad thing, but no, I think it's either like paid, pay as you go, because whatever solution you do to deliver content, like the user doesn't want to see, unless it's done very subtly, then clients are just going to create ways of filtering out and become cat and mouse and a waste of time.
Rabble, you get the last word, and we'll wrap up.
I think we could play more with relays. I think there's stuff that's really interesting, and I think the way in which you can easily move from one relay to another, similar to the way in which when you have a local Git repo, you have the whole thing, that keeps users empowered, and that's the most important thing, and that's why I'm not afraid of giant relays, because if the relay operator goes bad, it's very easy for users to move.
Hey, thank you so much. That was the panel, everyone. Give it a round of applause for the panelists. Thank you.